Hey language learners! Today I'm sharing my journey from being completely lost in Sao Paulo to developing a method that's helped thousands of students become fluent in English. If you've ever felt overwhelmed learning a new language, this story is for you. Hit subscribe and like if you want more stories and tips about language learning. Now, let me take you back to that life-changing morning at Sao Paulo International Airport. I'll never forget that August morning in 2009 when I first stepped into Sao Paulo's International Airport. Fresh out of university in Boston, clutching my teaching credentials and work visa, I found myself surrounded by a symphony of Portuguese conversations. My heart raced as I navigated through the crowd, realizing that this straightforward teaching position I'd accepted at an English school in Brazil might be more challenging than I'd imagined. Com licença, someone muttered as they brushed past me. I recognized these words from my pocket Portuguese phrasebook. Excuse me. I couldn't help but smile, realizing that even in these first moments, I was already learning. This simple interaction sparked what would later become my teaching philosophy. Learning a language happens in small, meaningful moments. That first week in Sao Paulo became my crash course in cultural immersion. Every interaction turned into a lesson. Ordering coffee. Café, por favor. Buying groceries or asking for directions became mini adventures. I started noticing patterns, words that sounded similar in English and Portuguese, universal gestures that transcended language barriers, and the warm smiles that encouraged my attempts to communicate. It was during one of these daily adventures that I had my first breakthrough. Lost in the maze-like streets of Vila Madalena, I found myself in a small bookstore. The elderly owner, noticing my confused expression, approached with a gentle, "Can I help you?" My relief at hearing English was immediate. But what struck me most was how she had intuited my need and adapted accordingly. "You speak English," I exclaimed, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. The shopkeeper, Maria, chuckled. "A little. I learn from books and movies. Every day, one new word." That conversation changed everything for me. Maria's simple approach to learning English, one word a day, through real-world connections, became the foundation of what I would later develop into my teaching methodology. I realized that learning a language wasn't about memorizing conjugation tables or drilling grammar rules. It was about building bridges between worlds, one word at a time. As I left the bookstore that day, with both a map and a new perspective, I couldn't help but think about my future students waiting at the language school. How many of them felt the same overwhelming pressure I had experienced at the airport? How many needed someone to meet them where they were, just as Maria had done for me? The next morning, I walked into my classroom with a new sense of purpose. My students sat nervously, expecting another traditional English lesson. Instead, I began differently. Let me tell you about my first week in Brazil. After sharing my story that morning, I saw something change in my students' eyes, a glimmer of recognition, perhaps even hope. They saw in me someone who understood their struggle, someone who had stood where they were standing. But understanding their challenges was just the beginning. I needed to transform that understanding into a method that would work. My first few weeks of teaching followed the school's traditional curriculum: grammar exercises, vocabulary lists, and structured dialogues. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The students could complete their workbook exercises perfectly, yet they froze when asked a simple question like, "How was your weekend?" I remembered Maria from the bookstore and her approach. Every day, one new word. But it wasn't just about learning words. It was about connecting them to real life. That's when I started noticing something fascinating. My students already knew more English than they realized. During a break, I overheard two students discussing their favorite shopping destinations. Another mentioned checking his email. These weren't just English words. They were bridges between our languages. This observation led to my first innovation, the friendly words list. I started collecting words that were similar or identical in both English and Portuguese. Shopping, email, internet, chocolate, restaurant, taxi, hotel. The list grew longer each day. My students' faces lit up as they realized they already had a foundation to build upon. "See," I told them, "you've been speaking English all along. These words are your friends. They're going to help you learn more." But I needed to prove it to them. So I designed an exercise. Take a friendly word and build a sentence around it. Shopping became, "I'm going shopping this weekend." Email transformed into, "I need to check my email." Simple sentences, yes, but ones they could use immediately in their daily lives. The results were immediate and encouraging. Students who had been hesitant to speak began participating more actively. They started bringing their own friendly words to class, proud of their discoveries. One student, Carlos, who worked in IT, brought a whole list of technology-related terms that were identical in both languages. Yet, I noticed something even more important. The fear was diminishing. By starting with familiar territory, students felt more confident venturing into unknown linguistic waters. They began asking questions about pronunciation, seeking out similar-sounding words, and most importantly, trying to speak without the paralyzing fear of making mistakes. I expanded the concept by creating themed lessons around these cognates. Business English became less intimidating when students realized how many corporate terms they already knew. Technical vocabulary seemed less daunting when broken down into familiar components. Each small victory built their confidence further. But perhaps the most rewarding moment came when Maria, my elderly friend from the bookstore, visited my class one day. She sat in the back, watching as my students engaged in animated conversations, switching between Portuguese and English as needed, using their friendly words as anchors in their sentences. "You see," she said to me after class, her eyes twinkling, "one word becomes many words. Many words become stories." She was right. What had started as a simple list of cognates had evolved into something much more powerful, a gateway to natural, confident communication. My students weren't just learning English. They were discovering their own ability to learn. As I wrapped up that day's lesson, planning for the next phase of our journey together, I couldn't help but think about how far we'd come. The nervous faces I'd seen on my first day were being replaced by confident smiles. But I knew we needed more structure, more systematic practice to maintain this momentum. It was time to develop a method that would take their learning to the next level. The success of the friendly words approach showed me that students needed structure without rigidity, practice without pressure. One evening, reviewing my lesson plans, I noticed something interesting in my most successful students' habits. They all balance different aspects of language learning, but in varying amounts. That's when the 15-15-15 method was born. The concept was simple. 15 minutes of listening, 15 minutes of speaking, and 15 minutes of writing. Not 2 hours of grammar drills, not endless vocabulary lists, just focused, manageable chunks of practice. I first tested it with Marina, a stressed executive who could only study during her lunch break. "I have no time," she'd tell me repeatedly. "Then let's use the time you have," I responded, handing her a carefully structured 45-minute plan. For listening practice, we started with short YouTube clips, just 15 minutes. I selected videos where speakers used friendly words in context, making the content more accessible. Marina would listen once without subtitles, then with Portuguese subtitles, and finally with English subtitles. The progression built her confidence while training her ear. The next 15 minutes focused on speaking. No complex dialogues, just practical phrases related to what she'd just heard. We practiced pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. I introduced the mirror technique, speaking while looking in a mirror to observe mouth movements and facial expressions. This simple trick helped students overcome their self-consciousness. The final 15 minutes were dedicated to writing, but not in the traditional sense. Instead of assigning essays, I asked students to write short, practical pieces, email responses, WhatsApp messages, or brief social media posts. Real-world writing that they could use immediately. The results exceeded my expectations. Students reported feeling less overwhelmed and more accomplished. They could see tangible progress in manageable timeframes. João, a shy teenager, told me, 15 minutes doesn't feel scary. I can do anything for 15 minutes. The method spread through word of mouth. Other teachers at the school began incorporating elements of it into their classes. Students started adapting it to their own schedules. 15 minutes during their morning commute, 15 minutes at lunch, 15 minutes before bed. But the real breakthrough came from understanding why it worked. The human brain processes information best in focused bursts. By breaking down the learning into 15-minute segments, we were working with our natural attention spans, not against them. I refined the method further based on student feedback. For the listening segment, we expanded beyond traditional educational content to include movie clips, song excerpts, and podcast snippets. The speaking practice evolved to include role-playing exercises that mimicked real-life situations. Writing tasks grew to encompass modern communication needs, from crafting professional emails to engaging in social media conversations. One particularly memorable success story was Raphael, a businessman who needed English for international calls. He adapted the 15-15-15 method to his specific needs. 15 minutes listening to business news podcasts, 15 minutes practicing common business phrases, and 15 minutes drafting professional emails. Within 3 months, he was confidently leading conference calls in English. The method's flexibility proved to be its greatest strength. Students could adjust the content while maintaining the structure. A teenager preparing for a gaming tournament focused on gaming terminology and online chat communication. A chef concentrated on culinary vocabulary and restaurant interactions. The framework remained consistent, but the content adapted to each learner's needs. As I watched my students progress, I realized we'd created something more than just another teaching method. We'd developed a sustainable approach to language learning that fit into busy modern lives. The 15-15-15 method acknowledged a crucial truth. Learning a language isn't about marathon study sessions. It's about consistent, focused practice. But there was still something missing. While students were making excellent progress individually, they needed opportunities to practice together, to support each other, and to experience the language in a more social context. It was time to take our learning community to the next level. The idea for English coffee came from an unexpected place, my local cafe. I'd noticed several of my students frequenting the same coffee shop where I graded papers, each sitting alone with their English textbooks. It seemed like such a missed opportunity. One rainy Wednesday, I invited 3 students to join me at my table. "Let's practice together," I suggested, ordering our coffees in a mix of Portuguese and English. What started as a casual meetup would evolve into something transformative. We met again the following week, this time with 5 students. The rules were simple. Try to speak English, but use Portuguese when needed. No judgment, no pressure, just conversation over coffee. We called it English Coffee, and it quickly became the highlight of everyone's week. The cafe's owner, Paulo, started reserving a corner for us every Wednesday afternoon. Our group grew organically. Students brought friends, colleagues, and family members. Soon, we had to add a second weekly session to accommodate everyone. What made English Coffee different from traditional conversation groups was its informality. There was no set curriculum, no designated teacher. Advanced students naturally helped beginners. Business professionals exchanged vocabulary with university students. The diversity of our group became its strength. I observed something fascinating. Students who were hesitant to speak in class found their voice at these gatherings. Perhaps it was the casual setting, or maybe the coffee, but inhibitions melted away. They made mistakes, laughed about them, and kept talking. This was exactly what language learning should be: natural, supportive, and enjoyable. The 15-15-15 method found a new application here. We naturally fell into patterns. 15 minutes of general chit-chat, 15 minutes focused on a specific topic, and 15 minutes of free conversation. Topics ranged from weekend plans to global news, from favorite Netflix shows to travel dreams. One of our regulars, Anna, a quiet accountant, transformed through these sessions. Her first English coffee meeting, she barely spoke above a whisper. 3 months later, she was organizing themed discussions and helping newcomers feel welcome. "Here," she told me, "I'm not just learning English, I'm living it." The impact extended beyond language skills. Professional networks formed, friendships blossomed, and cultural exchanges happened naturally. A Brazilian student planning a trip to New York got travel tips from an American expatriate. A marketing professional found a job lead through a fellow English coffee participant. We started incorporating mini celebrations of achievements. Someone got a job interview in English. We celebrated. Completed their first phone call in English. More celebration. These small victories inspired others and created a supportive community atmosphere. The success of English Coffee taught me something crucial about language learning. It's inherently social. While individual study builds foundation, it's through community that language comes alive. Students weren't just practicing English. They were using it to form real connections. As our community grew stronger, I noticed a pattern emerging. Those who seemed most unlikely to succeed in traditional learning environments were often the ones who thrived here. Their stories of transformation would reshape my understanding of what's possible in language education. The transformations I witnessed through English Coffee and the 15-15-15 method challenged everything I thought I knew about language learning. Each success story revealed a different barrier broken, a different fear conquered. Take Marcus, a 52-year-old engineer who believed he was too old to learn English. His company had just been acquired by an American corporation, and he faced early retirement if he couldn't communicate with the new management. His hands would shake during our first sessions, each word a struggle. We started small, just technical terms he already knew from his work. Then we expanded to simple email templates using these familiar words. Marcus dedicated himself to the 15-15-15 method, practicing during his morning commute. 6 months later, he was leading technical presentations in English. Age isn't the barrier, he told our English coffee group. Fear is. Then there was Lucia, a single mother working as a hotel housekeeper. She could only attend English coffee every other week, but she made each session count. Using her phone, she recorded guests' common requests, practicing them during her breaks. She turned everyday situations into learning opportunities. Within a year, she was promoted to front desk manager. Pedro's story particularly moved me. A talented programmer with severe social anxiety, he initially refused to join English coffee. Instead, we started with online chat sessions. Gradually, he progressed to voice calls, then small group meetings. Today, he works remotely for a Silicon Valley startup, conducting all his meetings in English. These successes weren't just about language acquisition. They were about personal transformation. Each student discovered their own path through their unique challenges. Sophia, a high school student with dyslexia, found that speaking and listening came naturally once we removed the pressure of reading. Now she helps other students with pronunciation. The pattern became clear. There's no single barrier to learning English, and consequently, no single solution. Success comes from adapting the method to each person's circumstances, while maintaining the core principles of consistent practice and supportive community. One morning, during a particularly lively English coffee session, I looked around the room. Marcus was explaining engineering concepts to a young student. Lucia was sharing hotel industry vocabulary with a newcomer. Pedro, now comfortable in small groups, was discussing programming with 2 other tech professionals. These weren't just language learners anymore. They were language users. Each had overcome their unique barriers by finding their personal connection to the language. Their stories became inspiration for new students, creating a cycle of encouragement and achievement that would define our growing community. Looking back on my journey from that nervous American at São Paulo's airport to where I am today, I'm struck by how much we've all learned together. The 15-15-15 method and English coffee have grown beyond anything I could have imagined, spreading to language schools across Brazil. What started as personal observations about learning has evolved into a comprehensive approach that's helped thousands overcome their language barriers. The key insights remain simple yet powerful. Start with what you know, practice in manageable chunks, and build a supportive community. Our original English coffee group has spawned dozens of similar gatherings across the city. Former students have become facilitators, starting their own groups in workplaces and community centers. The ripple effect continues to spread, creating new opportunities for connection and growth. The methodology has evolved with technology. Students now use apps for their 15-minute practice sessions, join virtual English coffee meetings, and connect with learners worldwide. Yet the core principles remain unchanged. Make learning accessible, keep it practical, and never underestimate the power of community support. Perhaps the most rewarding development has been watching my students become teachers themselves. Marcus now leads English training sessions at his company. Lucia mentors other hotel workers aspiring to advance their careers. Pedro creates programming tutorials in English, helping others in the tech community. Their success stories have taught me that teaching English isn't just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about empowering people to unlock new possibilities in their lives. Every time a student sends me a message about a job promotion, a successful presentation, or simply a confident conversation in English, I'm reminded of why I started this journey. As I write this, another English coffee session is beginning downstairs. New faces mix with familiar ones. Conversations flow between English and Portuguese, and another generation of language learners is discovering their voice. The future of language learning isn't in textbooks or language labs. It's in these moments of genuine connection and shared growth. To everyone starting their own language journey, remember that every expert was once a beginner. Every fluent speaker once struggled with their first words. Your path might look different from others, but with consistency, support, and the right approach, you'll find your way to fluency. The journey continues, one word, one conversation, one connection at a time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for more stories in English and lessons. Click the bell icon to be notified when we post new videos. Your support means a lot to us. See you next time.